you know, gifted and talented education is it goes by different names. I think uh, where you were at, it was called TAG, talented and gifted, right?
No, it was called so I didn't hear about it until I was in 5th grade when I moved to Vegas, and I was approached about testing into GATE when I was in 5th grade. And that was the first
How
time
did it
I
go through?
ever heard about it, and I don't think I'd ever heard about it in Colorado. So, but it was called GATE
How old were
in
you?
Vegas. Heck, 5th grade, so 10
Okay, that
probably.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Usually, it's most people will say from third to fifth grade. Mine was either fourth or fifth. I don't remember exactly. Um, and so I was a pretty decent. I mean, in elementary school, I was a great student. Uh, not not many social skills. I developed that really in high school, to be honest.
Same.
But
Yeah, I was
I
kind of
read
quiet.
very quick. Yeah, and so it made sense for them to approach my parents. The school did, and they're like, "Hey, there's this program, and you're going to take a test for it." And so I went to the library, and they closed off all the windows. Is weird. There's like a card. From what I remember, it looked like cardboard covering it. It wasn't just the blinds. And I did a test, and my mom eventually got in the way and said that she doesn't want me doing these, you know, she just wants me to go through the regular program. And I was kind of bummed about it. And so I didn't think anything of it until a few months ago when I saw a post on Reddit where it was like, were you testing for gay when you were younger? And there were some similarities there where it's just so odd that I check so many of these boxes. One of them is a an experience with near drowning, like a near drowning experience, which I have. I have two, really, one in a swimming pool, one at the ocean, and another one is having good luck when dealing with cops, which I've had a ton of. I had a counselor uh, in sixth grade, which was a year after I tested, uh, say that I have ESP because another that ESP is one, and then I had a premonition of my grandmother dying the night before she passed away, and that's another
That's
thing, having premonition.
that's crazy.
I've never told you about that.
No. Oh my god, that's
Oh,
crazy.
yeah. So I had this dream where my grandma was sitting in her old apartment and she was signing this document. And to my left, I was sitting across from her, and to my left was like this black figure wearing slacks and kind of like what Dick Tracy would wear,
Okay.
with the trench coat
Yeah.
and top hat, but it was just all black. And no matter how far left I looked, I couldn't make out his face. I just could not see a face. It was so I don't know if it was just like kind of like a misty black presence, absence of light, or I just for some reason couldn't make out a face because it was a dream. But I saw my grandma's face clear as day, and she didn't speak much English at all. In almost perfect English, she was like, "I'm moving away. Don't be sad." And she hands that guy the document. And most people, this is described as the Hat Man. A lot of people describe it the Hat Man. To me, it seemed like he was the Grim Reaper, but he was like a courier for her. He was like kind of like some dude, like an Uber driver, basically being like, "Yeah, you ready to head out?" And yeah, that morning,
I remember his name, but like who's the boat worker on the River of Styx that kind of
Hades.
yeah, who like kind of takes you across the river into the underworld after your spirit dies in like Greek mythology. So something like that.
Um, I thought it was Hades, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, because Hades is the lord of the underworld. Okay, he's not exactly like ferrying. He's not the ferryman. The ferryman takes you across the river to the underworld from the entrance of the underworld, and that's the journey. And to pay the ferryman, that's why they put the coins on your eyes.
Mm, yeah, see, I didn't even know about that, but essentially, yes, I assume was the man
Yeah,
or entity taking her. And the next morning, she, you know, got a phone call saying that we should come to her house, and we knew something was wrong. And by the time we got there, the coroners are there and everything. Um, and then so but my mom thought I was crazy because I was bugging out over this. And I don't know if she thought I was lying or what. So she sent me to that counselor in middle school who then told me, she was like, oh, don't worry, you're not weird, you have ESP. And what fucking counselor, like school counselor tells it's odd that a student counselor would fucking say that to the kid that you have ESP. So that's another thing. And then I had existential dread right around that time as well, which is another kind of thing. And one of
kind of young
the
for that,
rare,
huh?
I think so. Yeah. I don't know if that sparked it, or you would think that that kind of would
Like
calm
a
you down.
traumatic experience kind of sparked that.
Maybe
Yeah.
realizing that life is finite. But the
Was that the
city I grew
first?
up in,
Was that like your first like experience with like a family member dying?
uh, no, I had an aunt who passed away. I mean, it wasn't like blood related aunt, but my uncle's wife passed away a few years before that. Um, but I was close with my grandma, so
Yeah.
I would say even to this day, it's like the closest person to me that's passed away. Um, but like the city I grew up in, Burbank, California, was pretty crazy how this city started. So during World War II, they needed open space for Lockheed Martin to come develop weapons. And so the that westward expansion during World War II that had to do with it. I think Seattle was another big town, but Lockheed, which to this day I believe is a big government contractor,
They are one of the
they pretty
biggest government
much,
contractors.
yeah, they pretty much created the city, funded it. And you're familiar with Ingo Swann and remote viewing,
N-
are you?
Maybe I don't. That doesn't sound familiar to me, but maybe I'm familiar with it from like a different terminology point. What's the? Yeah, explain what that
It's
is.
almost like astral projection. It's controlled astral projection that you close off your senses and you're given these random coordinates that you could pretty much go with your senses and see, feel, smell, and you just document it. And Ingo Swann was one of the most, probably the most popular remote viewer of all time. But there was another very successful one. His name was Pat Price, and he was part of the Burbank Police Department. And so there's always been this weird CIA presence in Burbank. A lot of people say that actors are used for CIA psyops and shit to get the message across subtly. And so I wonder if that had to do with anything where I grew up. Another thing I want to add real quick is uh, one of the questions was, did you grow up near a nuclear facility? Which I did not, but my middle school, I uh, was one of the first, at least in California or Southern California, that had reclaimed water in their systems. So like the drinking fountain was fucking reclaimed water. There's signs for it everywhere. I have a picture from graduation where I'm standing with my family. There's a sign behind us that says reclaimed water.
That's crazy.
So there's something there's something there too. Usually it's the only son or the youngest male child who gets selected. Drug use until mid-30s is prevalent. There's a bump. I forgot what it's called. That on the back of your head. Do you have a bump on the back of your head?
I kind
I
of
have a
have like
huge
that
one.
little like I have like a little divot in the back of my skull, but no, not really. I wasn't in the gate
That might
program. I
be
don't
it.
even I don't know if I ever actually tested. I can't remember.
Well,
So,
if they ask about it, they're at least interested.
yeah, I just don't think I ever actually tested or did anything for it. I just remember we were asked about it when we first moved to Vegas, like when I was like coming to like that elementary school for the first time. Um we were talked to about the gate program after I had done like just when you do like the basic test to kind of just see where you're at, to see like what, when you transfer schools are like, well, where, what are your assessment levels? So like when I took the assessment test, they had talked to us about gate, but I don't think we ever did it. I don't remember ever doing tests or being asked weird questions. Maybe I did and I blocked it out, but I really don't think so.
So one of the tests that people, and I remember this test is, and this ties in with remote viewing, is they'll give you headphones, and that those days it was the closest thing to noise canceling headphones, and they play these frequencies that keep coming up on our podcast, which is funny. And they
I
play these weird little
I have more to say about that today, actually.
nice, and so they play these weird frequencies, and then it would be like little patterns. And this ties with remote viewing because when you remote view, they play the same freaking frequencies, and it pretty much is supposed to tie your subconscious and your conscious mind together, and that allows you to remote view. I know I'm shortening up the process very
Are
much, but in
are
in a
they
gist, that's it.
are they hooking you up to anything else to like monitor anything? Or are they just giving you headphones? Or do they have like
They're
something?
giving
Are
you
they like
headphones.
monitoring like your brain activity while this is happening?
No, it's not like Stranger Things in that sense.
Okay.
Um, but but they ask questions like, what would be the next pattern or frequency that plays, and how do you feel right now? And then they have these little cards where you would pick one and say why. It would be four shapes. It would be like a river looking thing, a square, a circle, and something else. And so there's a lot of these shared experiences with kids that are wondering, what the fuck was it for? And there's some theories behind it. But yeah, so the the really odd thing is that the the it was called Project Gateway with the CIA when they were doing remote viewing. That was like one of the first things they gave it. And it's just weird how gate and gateway are so similar in name, yet they use some of the same devices. And it's just a really, really odd thing. So it was the CIA trying to recruit kids that had an innate ability to uh, remote view, do espionage, and a lot of I've heard theories for Stranger Things that like that's what Stranger Things is about, and a very exaggerated version, obviously. But 11 is like a
Is like a
K Ultra type child,
just like responded highly well to like the testing and the remote viewing stuff and frequencies and
exactly.
you know the end of that program is they might give you superpowers.
Yeah, or it might just be in her head, like remote viewing, or yeah, who knows? Who knows? And like she's tying it together with Dungeons and Dragons,
Yeah.
so that's like interfering with it. It's gonna be interesting what they do with the last season of that.
I have only watched through season 3. I need to watch season 4 before they start dropping the season 5 stuff. I thought my wife was mad that I watched season 3 without her, and then I thought she was going to want to watch season 3 again. So I waited for her to watch season 4, and now she just doesn't seem that interested in it. So like that's on my list of things to power through. Eventually is the
Mm.
fifth season is the fourth season of Stranger Things, but the third season lost me a little bit. I loved the first season, but after that, it just kind of started dropping for me.
Gotcha. So going back to Gate, I'm sure you've had a look over it. Did you find anything that was particularly interesting in it?
No, and I didn't do as deep of a dive as I wanted to, but most like all I kept finding were correlations of the Gate program and basically MK Ultra. Like there are a lot
Yes.
of similarities between the two programs. My understanding of MK Ultra is that they were monitoring certain people in like the 60s and 70s and giving them certain drugs and then trying to basically manipulate them into doing things that they wanted them to. Like, I feel like there's like all these rumors that Marilyn Manson was part of, um, or Charles Manson was part of MK Ultra. So,
Yep.
and like they were giving
Oh
him
yeah, that's
acid and that like part of his cult and like how all of that came about was like the government basically like drugging him and making him believe those things that he believed.
yeah, that's why Haight Ashbury became such a big place in San Francisco during the '60s, just because the CIA was operating out of there, getting acid and seeing the results of how much mind control they could do with the substance.
Yeah, but so like,
Jack Ruby,
so do they say that like
Jack
when did
Ruby.
Gate start? Because MK Ultra was a program in the 60s and 70s. So like when did Gate actually start? Was that something that had eventually kind of branched out of the same kind of thing, or was that just like a program that they started in like the late 80s and early 90s? Do you know when it started?
I've seen people from the early '80s, um, yeah, as far back as the early '80s, which coincides with when Project Gateway supposedly stopped. And so you start recruiting younger and younger, changing the names of it, changing the objectives, at least publicly. And Gate supposedly ended in the late '90s, but there's people saying that they took similar tests well after, like people younger than us remember these tests.
Yeah, but
And one of the
there
things that,
weren't were there kids who were taking them in middle school and shit, or was this just an elementary school thing?
well, the first type of testing, it was really prevalent from third to fifth grade, from what I've seen.
Okay. Which tracks is if they approached you in third grade and they approached me in fifth grade. Like we're both in the same kind of boat.
Yeah, mine was either fourth or fifth grade, but I remember there was already kids in gate when I had tested.
Yeah, I feel like there were like 20 or 25 kids in the gate program at my elementary school, and it was like I feel like they all met in like the cafeteria after the end of the day.
Yeah, they would go on little field trips. Um, they would do like they would decipher hieroglyphics. There's all sorts of weird shit, but a lot of kids who were in gate for a while. Uh, Egyptian hieroglyphs were a very popular topic, and I mean that's cool. It's interesting to kids, but was there a deeper
Yeah, like
objective with that?
I've always been into like Egyptian, history and hieroglyphics. So I think it's cool, but what it- what is a what is a school program for gifted children need you to read hieroglyphics for?
Yeah, and I don't know if this was a fever dream because this is another thing. A lot of kids have blank spots about Gate. They remember being in it, but there's a haze in your mind. Um, there was a lot of kids that were given like these pink uh, drinks that had like high amounts of fluoride in it, and I forgot what they called it, but it was like supposedly it was good for your teeth or whatever. Like it was some sort of mouthwash or some shit that you could swallow. But that just sounds shady as fuck. You know, that screams MK Ultra.
Isn't there fluoride in
Yeah,
like all of our water supply?
right. And that's how they're selling it. But who knows what the fuck was in that shit?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't
And they're
remember.
trying to take the fluoride out of the water.
Is that even possible at this point?
Um, treating the water, I'm sure there's a way. Yeah, because a lot of the water that has fluoride in it is because it's waste runoff, and they're just saying that it's safe. You know, we don't really need fluoride. Apparently, I'm no expert
Yeah,
in
I'm
this,
no
but
expert either,
um,
but this is something I see RFK speaking about frequently lately, and I'm like, I don't know about I don't know about this guy's credentials, so I'm just gonna leave it
I
there.
don't know. I kind of like him, honestly, but he's big into like the whole. Uh, he really believes that children in schools are being like poisoned at a young age, and like the red dye in candy. Uh, there's apparently links to ADD, ADHD, um, and he's like, why treat it with Ritalin, Adderall, instead of take the stuff that causes it out of the food chain.
Yeah, and look, there are probably and look, you're right. Like we are when as a country when it comes to just like children's nutrition and what we are putting in our food, we are the worst offender out of the rest of the world, about
Yeah.
what's actually healthy and what's not and how much additive sugar are we putting in everything and how many like chemical preservatives are we putting in everything to make everything last. Like we're the only country that's doing some of the shit that we're doing. So like like he's probably right about certain things like that. I just I have on the other side of that, it's like I have some strong opinions you know about vaccines and things like that, like we had eradicated measles off the face of this planet because we all take that vaccine when we're kids. And now all of a sudden you have kids who have you have like a recent death case from of a child who had measles because he didn't get vaccinated. Like we this is something we'd eradicated for over 100 years that is coming back now because we've politicized vaccinations. So, you know, there's uh,
Now, I mean, if you're vaccinated from measles, we don't necessarily have to worry about that. I get what you're saying though, but his argument is there's so many more children with autism now that like if you can curb measles and if it's nearly eradicated, that maybe we don't have to worry about measles as much.
I just don't know if
Which
that's
is
the case when you're starting to see, kids die of it.
yeah, there's a lot more kids not being vaccinated.
There are a lot more
It's
kids
crazy.
not getting vaccinated. So, which like look, I get the hesitation around new vaccines. Like, yeah, if your hesitation is around the way that they rolled out the COVID vaccine, I totally understand because yeah, like that was rushed. It was kind of complicated. The government was doing some weird shit the government's reaction to the pandemic was complicated at best. So like I
No, it's a
understand
dumb question.
that rhetoric, but like on the other side of it, it's just like now you've got people who took that took that viewpoint and are applying it to vaccines that have been successful for over 100 years. You know, so I just think too many people take an opinion about one thing and then apply it to everything in that category, like it's, you know, uh, yeah, I don't know how to 100% explain what I was trying to say, but that's I just
I get it.
yeah, like you're taking a small percentage of something and applying it to 100% of that situation, and I don't think that's the right course of action, and I don't think people are. I don't think America's researched enough. I think a lot of these opinions that I see are people who are just kind of understanding a very small portion of something and then just taking it and running with it.
It goes both ways, I feel,
Yeah, it does.
because
It does.
the other side could say the same thing about measles, saying that like, oh, one case, and like we're making it seem like the end of the world.
That
But
not wrong.
what if polio comes back? you
Yeah, like
that's something
what if the
crazy.
plague makes a resurgence? Like, are we willing to take that risk? I'm not.
Yeah, that, and I think that's why people were really tripping on COVID is because they thought it was the plague,
Yeah, and
and they were just being proactive about it. But who knows? So there's so many conspiracies
I
about
know. Well, that's just life nowadays. Like everything. Like uh, I feel like I see multiple. No matter what you're looking at nowadays, there's conspiracies surrounding it.
it. Anything, even that plane crash
Do
in
you?
San Diego yesterday.
Yeah, dude. Do you think that people just running with conspiracies is a failure of our government to enlighten us with the actual truth? Like, do you think that the more that the government lies and tries to cover up shit, the more that like we as a society kind of run, rapid with, conspiracy theories trying to explain something that we don't understand? I
This
think
is my analogy that I have for it. If a chick like early on in your relationship cheats on you, she could tell the truth. This is for certain guys, not everybody. There's going to be a big part of the population, if everybody got cheated on early in a relationship, that would never, the girl or guy can say the truth 100% after that, but that person's not going to believe him. You know what I mean? And that's kind of what happened with our society. Is that there were all these lies that we were told, to where the government can come tomorrow and be 100% transparent. Yet we wouldn't believe them. We think they're up to something. I
yeah.
think it's just too far gone.
Yeah, and just years of build up and years of lies, and yeah, it's just I don't know where this shit went off the rails, but it was we drove off the rails too far before we realized we were off the rails.
Yeah, and but that's the thing though, is like with free speech, people say that it's just Americans, but there, free speech is pretty prevalent here compared to most countries. And
Yeah,
um, the idea that the fact that we can talk about it, if we choose to even address it, it's always going to be a good thing, because you don't have to give the time of day. If you think something's crazy, don't argue with someone online. Like a lot of these people are attention seekers, I feel. So if something seems totally off base to you, why engage with it?
yeah,
So there's a lot of factors on why we've gone off the rails. I'm sure there's a lot more that I can't think of, but it's fun. It's good. It's good. I'd rather deal with that than everybody being like a blind. faith with
Yeah.
it or a sheep with it.
No, I agree. Like I just question society. You know,
It's crazy some of the shit that they come up with. I'm like,
I
what
know
the fuck? And I think math has a lot
it probably does, but like
that.
you think about ancient time, even in ancient times. Look, there is a reason that there's a reason that a court jester was a part of the castle court. You need people to point out the absurdity.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, yeah, otherwise you can go too far in one way. Otherwise, one king or one government could destroy everything if you don't have citizens to kind of call it out and be like, oh yeah, this is kind of whack, bro. Like, what are you doing?
It's crazy now. It's everything has a conspiracy attached to it now, which it's hard to keep up. So you got to kind of choose your battles.
Yeah.
Like,
Do you feel like there's
but
so many
you
more conspiracy theories nowadays than there used to be because of the internet? Like, do you feel like
kind of
at a certain
well,
point there was like, oh
yeah.
yeah, like known like conspiracy theorists that like always talking about JFK, always talking about MK Ultra, but now in the age of the internet, there's like I I probably hear a new conspiracy theory almost every day. And like, oh, some of that's probably the content that I'm following that like I'm into that stuff. Like I'm super into paranormal and like ghosts and aliens and all that shit. So like I'm following a lot of stuff. So I'm like exposing myself to new stuff, but I just feel like in general there's just a lot more prevalence, of it now because of the internet.
Well, some of those came out to be true though. A lot of these things we know today as facts started out as conspiracy theories.
What throw some examples out there for our listeners.
So well, I mean, if you want to call them facts, but they're widely accepted, like 9/11 being at some sort of inside job, the degree of which we don't know, but it wasn't just random terrorists who hated freedom. Um, the whole fact that the CIA was behind JFK's murder. Um,
Do the documents that the CIA released recently about that, does that prove it, or
I don't know. I didn't read into it. I heard it was kind of a nothing burger yet again,
yeah, that's kind of what I
but
that was my
there's
understanding too.
a lot of evidence that's come out over the years from firsthand sources that Cubans were hired for some reason or another to get the job done, and it had a lot to do with like the Bay of Pigs and how JFK was calling out the military uh,
Yeah, the
complex
industrial complex.
in America, an industrial complex. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Another conspiracy was the scope of COVID, like the fact that it wasn't out of uh, they call those places where the bats are and shit, like the wet market. And now it's being shown it came out of a lab. So who created that? Why was it released? How did it get released?
Yeah. And look, some of that we're never going to know because, it took, that it happened in China, so like we're never going to know the truth.
Right. But there's also some evidence that suggests that uh, North Carolina, Chapel Hill, UNC University, um, it began there, the research and development for it. There's just so many radicals
Yeah,
to
and
go
then
through
what?
on
And
there.
then what? They moved that research from like something that they were onto in North Carolina to Wuhan.
Yeah,
Interesting.
it's weird, man.
I know. Fucking.
And then the the patents that came right around that time, and the investments of certain people really shady. It's a whole it's a whole deep thing. Even Pizzagate, which I think we touched on this a few podcasts ago,
I
but
don't know if we've touched on
okay,
Pizzagate.
we touched on Frazzle Drip, I
Okay.
know, but
Yeah.
so you're familiar with Pizzagate, right?
Yeah.
So maybe not. Who knows about the pinball pizza? That could be bullshit in its own. But the fact that there's a group of quote unquote elite that run child sex trafficking rings across the world, that's pretty much coming out to be fact. And you hear all these celebrities and people of power, the whole Epstein thing, which is that's another conspiracy in itself with
Yeah,
him. Did he kill
absolutely.
himself or
Yeah,
not?
did he kill himself or not? And so Pizzagate, did that start with the Anthony Weiner emails? They're saying that
I think it,
uh, they exposed pedo rings through Democratic emails basically because of the Anthony Weiner investigation. Is that that's what Pizzagate is, right?
I think so because I think he had email. I don't think Anthony Weiner was ever suspected of doing that, but
No, but they found but
his ex-wife,
yeah.
Huma Abedin, and Chuck Podesta, who was close with Hillary Clinton, the Podesta emails or the docket or whatever. That's where things started rolling with Pizzagate. Weird emails of like Obama wanting like so many hot dogs delivered, like being a plane. There's this really cool thing I saw on Instagram, or it might have been X, where they tie all these photos and the comments underneath the photos of pinball pizza and places like that, where they do such a good deep dive into it. I was not I thought it was complete bullshit until I started seeing this dude connect the dots. I wish I remembered who fucking made that because I've been looking for it for so long. But yeah, there's like little clues and Instagram pictures. Um, it's a wild ride. Well, so many people.
Yeah, that is fucking crazy.
Sometimes I really do feel like, just like with the whole UFO UAP thing, is that there's deliberate misinformation, deliberate crazy, wacky conspiracy theories to muddy the waters, and for a conspiracy theory to come out completely untrue, and then that way you could point and be like, oh yeah, you guys thought this. Like let's say flat Earth, for example. Be like, you guys thought the fucking Earth is flat, and it's not. And so why, you know, you're one of those people. So of course, COVID. You would think COVID isn't like involved with the government. The government had nothing to do with it and shit. So I think there's a big aspect of that where there's deliberate misinformation. So we could just be like, what the fuck is going on? Which one's truth? Which one isn't?
Yeah.
Who's crazy? Who's not crazy?
T- Too bad they're not all as easy to prove as the flat earth theory, which I absolutely love watching those guys like go out there with all their equipment and like climbing shit and like trying to prove it wrong and then realizing that there's a curve. Just like the fucking like breakdown that as they realize that they're wrong.
Oh, really? I haven't seen
Oh
those
my
videos.
god, dude, you gotta go look up people trying to prove that the earth is flat, dude. And like half of these dudes go out there and they'll like go to like a certain place in the world where they say that like you can see the curve on like the top of a mountain or something. They're like, this is bullshit. I'm gonna go out there. And then they're like, they're up there and they're like, wait a minute. I can see the curve. I was wrong.
Hey, you know what? If that's how they handle it, power to
Yeah,
them.
power to them.
We've all been wrong.
I just how do you get sucked into that theory? How do you start being a flat earther? I'm real curious like how that process even like occurs to you to be like, well, the earth is flat.
Well, I've seen a few things actually. It's funny you asked that because, well, one theory is that it's very Christian oriented to where God created Earth and everything else is kind of like just whatever. The world is centered around the Earth. And that's why it's flat. But I saw this thing recently where this dude has this almanac of, it was way back when like California and Florida was still Spanish owned. And it shows how the countries are way different in size than if you were to have it and like projected as a globe. And there is there were excerpts in there where it was saying like the challenge of a cylinder, not a cylinder, but like a circular world or whatever, and saying like what the challenges of proving that are. Because I guess they thought the world was flat too back then.
Well, yeah, when they first yeah, dude, like
It
yeah, until a certain point, yeah, of course they thought it was flat because there's not really any technology or anything to prove them otherwise, but like I feel like in, like the Greek and Italian philosophers who like started figuring this shit out, like it's been pretty solid that the earth is round since like the 1400s, right? Like when they kind of all figured this out, and who knows what we thought before that.
Well, you can argue it was before that with stuff like the Stonehenge being
Yeah, dude, yeah,
round,
cuz they were,
like, and they had to measure the sun and the curvature of the sun and
how good
where it
and like
lands and all that.
ancient ships were really good at like following star maps, which the constellations moved, with the planet and like the rotation, and like they were still
Yeah,
pretty fucking accurate at following it. So
I think the flat earthers would say that the stars move and we're just kind of on a surface. It's the stars that rotate. Like,
like the stars are rotating around
yeah,
you,
bro.
not you're rotating within the stars.
Right.
Well, and then
Or,
there's the fact that
we're not,
stars are not like stars aren't, when you're a kid, you look up, you're like, oh, those are stars. Like, and like you can draw a picture of a star and it's like, yeah, I've got this 5 point star. But like what you're actually looking at is like light from like, that traveled like 2,000 light years to reach us.
right.
Like you're not
That star
actually,
might not even be there anymore.
yeah, like it's potentially not even there anymore, which is
Hmm.
crazy to think about that. You're like, oh, all right.
Yeah. Yeah. And that goes into the whole time travel thing, paradoxes, shit like that. Just completely blows my mind.
As much as we know, there is still more that we don't know. And I think that the more
Oh,
things that
there's
we
so much.
understand, the more complicated some of the things that we already understand become.
The quest for knowledge is gonna drive you eventually crazy.
Yeah,
There's
and
some
some of the
things that
things
I
we're
like may
doing
not
in
know.
those quests for knowledge might be changing the way that we perceive knowledge already. Like there are are you following the theory of the Large Hadron Collider that
Uh, no, I mean nothing new that I've heard from.
okay, but like there's a theory. So, the Hadron Collider, like is I don't really understand what it does, but it's trying to create atoms, right? Or something like that. But
They 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 have electrons going at the speed of light colliding to make the God particle,
yes. So
or that's what was created. They're trying to recreate the Big Bang, pretty
yes,
much.
like a simulated version. But like there's a theory that when they first turned it on in like I think it was first turned on in like 2008 or something. So like there's a theory that when they first turned it on that we shifted into a different dimension and that's why like we're experiencing Mandela effects and shit like that is like because things are actually different because we shifted into like a mirrored reality that is slightly different from ours because we turned on the Large Hadron Collider.
So that original timeline is still there, and some of us shifted, or what?
Yes. Or like the whole planet shifted into the new timeline basically, but the old timeline is still, kind of cruising, but like we shifted into like an alternate version of our timeline basically to where like we're starting to remember things differently and like we're all convinced that we remember something from our childhood that's actually slightly different. So like some of these cultural phenomenons are, because we may have shifted into a mirrored version of our reality that's slightly different.
But if they're recreating the Big Bang and it starts from scratch, wouldn't it be a universe that's like young and still developing?
Potentially, but like what if it didn't work the way that they did? What if it, what if it did? What if it just what if it didn't work the way that they thought and it really just caused you to shift realities a little bit?
Yeah, because it's electrons from today they're using. They're not using electrons from like way back when.
Yeah.
That's oh, that's weird.
Yeah, dude, it's crazy, right?
But then electrons cannot be created nor destroyed. It's such a weird concept. Do you have any Mandela effects in your life?
um Bernstein Bears.
Really?
Yeah, 100%. Like I watched that shit when I was a kid, and I swear to God, it was not spelled that way.
You thought it was Bernstein?
Yes.
Like they were Jewish?
Yes. Abso-fucking-lutely. My grandma like bought that.
Yeah.
My grandma would buy those books when we were kids, and like she had all these like VHS tapes that she would just, of like the cartoon that I would watch when I was a kid, and like, yeah, dude, it just my entire life I thought it was spelled that way, and then like, all of a sudden, you start seeing people who are like, it's actually spelled this way, and I'm like, no fucking way, right? But
The Fruit of the Loom one is a very popular one, but I've seen people posting
I
shirts from back then that didn't have the cornucopia.
yeah, dude, and I don't feel like the cornucopia makes any fucking sense with fruit, but like
But dude, I
I've always recognized that as like a Thanksgiving symbol, you know?
yeah,
Not
but
really like
yeah,
why would an underwear company put a cornucopia on it? But like why are they putting fruit on their underwear too, I guess.
exactly.
But
But the only I thought the only reason that I knew what a cornucopia was because of Fruit of
really? And like no, dude, and like I remember like I really remember learning about it in like like when we were like little kids talking about Thanksgiving and like learning the history of Thanksgiving. Like I remember like that's where my memory of like cornucopias came from. And like cornucopia, not a big fucking thing. Rarely see them. I don't know if I've ever actually seen one in real life.
Yeah, me neither.
Yeah.
What's another one that kind of got me? No, that Luke, I'm your father, not being the real thing. That's kind of weird.
Yeah, what did
How
they
do you
think they say?
remember
What did
that
they
line?
think they say is Luke, I am your father?
Yeah,
But he
Luke,
said
I'm your
he
father
actually
is true.
says, "No, I am your father."
No, he doesn't even say I'm your father. Let's see. What's his? No, he
Obi-Wan never
actually say?
told you. That's like my favorite movie, and I still fucking am having trouble.
Oh, it says, yeah, you're right. It says,
No.
no, I am your
Yeah,
father
no, I
instead
am
of
your
Luke, I
father.
am your
Yeah,
father.
he says
Okay.
no, I am your father. I was like, I fucking know this. Like, it's like Empire Strikes Back is like one of those movies that like just really hits for me. It's my favorite Star Wars movie. I don't think anything will ever change that.
Okay. So that's not much different
No, not
between
much
this
different.
one.
Like Luke, I am your father, like makes sense, and I think that like I think what happened there is like when other popular media gets something wrong, but that's very popular, then people will start copying, the person who copied it wrong. It's like a bad game of telephone. So it's like,
Yes, yes.
say
And I
so
think
it's like
that's
the movie says, "No, I am your father." But then like how many other movies have quoted that wrong? Like I can in Tommy Boy, Chris Farley when he's standing in front of the fucking fan with like the you've seen Tommy Boy, right?
yeah.
And he's got that like robotic hand thing that he puts his hand in, which I had one of those when I was a kid. I wish I still had that. But he's like playing with that in the fan, and he's like, "Luke, I am your father," like just like trying to make the Vader voice in like the fan frequency. Um,
Right.
but like maybe like people are like remembering from that, which I don't think that was a super popular movie. But like I'm sure there's other instances where pop culture got it wrong, and then people are pulling it from pop culture instead of their memory of the original movie. Like a lot of people,
I think that's what happened.
yeah, like your average Star Wars fan probably hasn't seen The Empire Strikes Back as, the average person probably hasn't seen Empire Strikes Back as many times as I have.
Yeah. I think that's what happened with Snow White too, with the whole, or is it Cinderella? Magic mirror on the wall instead of mirror on the wall. It's
Oh,
just such a yeah. So it's really magic mirror on the wall, but
really?
in the movie it's mirror on the wall. Yeah, but then in the
What did
books it's mirror on the
what
wall.
does it say? What does it say in the original Snow White?
The animation,
Yeah,
she says magic mirror. She
Magic
doesn't
Mirror.
say mirror.
Really?
Yeah,
Damn.
that's one
Which
that's very popular.
makes way more sense than calling an object by its name twice.
Right.
Like I never really thought about that. I never really took that to be like, oh, magic. When somebody says it, you're not really like, this is weird. Why'd you say mirror twice? But like magic mirror makes way more fucking sense because like it is a magic mirror. So like if you're addressing it, it's just yeah, wild.
What about the Shazam movie? Did that ever exist for you with Sinbad?
No, no, because the only version
Yeah.
I remember No, I remember Sinbad movies, but like I also I also remember what I remember. I think what people are doing is they're blending that Shaquille O'Neal movie where he was a genie called Kazam with with
Yes.
like a Sinbad movie that came out around the same time.
Yes. And Sinbad in the 70s, it's like based off Persian mythology or some shit, to where Sinbad was this sea voyager who dealt with genies and magic and shit like that. So I think it's just all these things
Combined,
combined.
yeah, dude. Yeah, cuz like
Yeah.
I remember like an animated movie from when I was like a little kid called Sinbad and the Seven Seas or something like that.
Right. That too. Yeah. So I think they're just confusing Sinbad the man as
As
Sinbad the fucking
Sinbad
character.
the character, like the like yeah, Sinbad they're mixing up Sinbad the comedian and Sinbad the sailor from,
Yeah.
which I'm looking up Sinbad the sailor right now and it says the character history says he came from Baghdad. I wonder who created
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, dude, Sinbad's first voyage, like, I remember that story. What is this from? Like, is this Persian? Like, are these like Persian stories or
I think so. Yeah, Baghdad back then was one of the like one of the capitals of the Persian Empire. Let me look it up. Sinbad Sailor. From the Abbasid Caliphate, which one of the capitals was Baghdad. Origins and sources. Yeah, the 1001 Nights, which is written by some trace some tales trace their roots back in ancient and medieval Arabic, Persian, and Mesopotamian literature. So like Aladdin comes from that, Alibaba and the 40 Thieves comes from that. Uh, and
which
then
Disney
obviously
combined
the
those
seven.
two stories together to give you Aladdin and the 40 Thieves.
Yeah, and the original Aladdin, it takes place in Asia.
Really? It doesn't take place in the Middle East?
No, because it was supposed to be about a foreign land in the East. So when the Western culture got it, that foreign land to the East was the
Was
Middle East.
was the Middle East, but to the Middle East, the foreign land to the east is Asia. That makes so much sense, bro.
Yeah,
Ugh.
yeah.
Which,
I'm looking
it
at
could
pictures right now.
which how many which, dude, like the history of that area is so rich because of, like I've been reading a lot about Sumer and like ancient, like the Sumerians and just like the whole culture of, the the cradle area and just like kind of, in Mesopotamia and kind of like what it became and just like the yeah, dude, there's so much history there and like it's like our first civilization that just kind of branched out and it just has transformed over the years.
Yeah, and it could be the last place that survived the last cataclysm with the whole Younger Dryas theory.
Do you
The civilization could be
do you
way
believe in
older than that
do you
too.
believe the Younger Dryas theory?
It makes a lot of
I
sense,
think it makes
but
so much sense. And did you watch what's this Graham Hancock? Did you watch his
Hancock,
Netflix show? The Lost uh I can't remember what it's called, but
lost civilizations
yeah,
or
Lost
something.
Civilizations, yeah. He's
No, I
dude,
didn't actually. I've heard about
the
it.
whole fucking so like the whole archaeologist community like discredits him, says he's full of shit. But like I don't think that you can just have a theory and say that that theory is right and then discredit everybody else who has a theory that doesn't align with your theory. I don't think that's good science.
Well, they've spent their whole lives researching this and thinking it's one way, and then this guy comes out and completely blows that out of the water. And yeah, I can see why they're
Yeah,
pissed,
dude, but like some of
but it
these
doesn't justify it.
uh, some his theory, look, and when you take multiple scientists and it's like if you take Graham Hancock and like line his theories up with like what what like Randall Carlson's talking about with like ancient floods and like the way that these valleys and things and like all the water damage in these canyons and stuff in like that same area, like Look, I think
And
that
every
the
culture
and
has a flood area.
yeah, dude, and look, I think that to an extent, like, yeah, like the archaeologists, yeah, up until a certain point, yeah, all of their evidence pointed to what their theory is. But like, I think when they discovered Göbekli Tepe, it fucking changed. It leans more towards the Younger Dryas theory than what the initial archaeology theory was about when civilization started. So,
100%.
and when you look,
Now,
you can't tell me that they want to say that like there's no way that, an ancient civilization and all of their technology could have existed and disappeared, which I I think if you are an archaeologist, I think there's no way that that's true. Have you looked at what the gardens of Babylonia look like now compared to like ancient drawings, and just like how much these bricks and the building tools, that even the building tools we have now, like those bricks and that stuff was not meant to last for thousands of years. Everything breaks down from erosion and from, elemental decay.
yeah, it's going to be super interesting because there's so much unearthed from that area, like Turkey and stuff. And Turkey, the Mount Ararat, where they theorize Noah landed after the flood,
Eh,
which is
yeah, there's a lot
um,
of yeah, I seen something recently about that they like had found something that like really solidified that his ship was there.
it's crazy. Um, we're hitting up on an hour,
We
but
are.
I wanted to hear what you were talking about earlier about the
The
frequencies.
frequencies. Okay, so all right. So we were talking about the healing frequencies and different frequencies. Okay. Now, some of the frequencies we mentioned
Yeah.
in that last podcast were like 428, which is typically used in spas, 532, typically used in spas, 928. Okay.
Mhm.
Before 1939, there was no universal standard in the world of what hertz we export our music at, basically, or everything's created at. Okay. Or essentially what you're tuning to. Our guitar tunings, the A that we use, like the standard, when you look at it, they all talk about A being, kind of the universal note. Well, our tunings, the tuning of what we recognize as the A scale the A is tuned to 440 hertz, and then everything else follows that. That wasn't standardized until 1939. Okay. Before that, before that, people were all over the place. There was no world standard for what frequency you would tune your instruments or music to. Nowadays, all that's done in the program in Ableton. You can export out of whatever DAW, whatever frequency you want. Okay. I can change it to whatever. And the average of what I can find in like the 1920s and 30s, when was like an average of like 432 to 435 hertz. Okay. Now, 432 is pretty close to 428, which is a healing frequency. It's supposed to be more of a like relaxed, um, good for your nervous system. Okay. So, like when music was produced at like 432, it was better for our nervous system. It switched to 440 hertz in 1939. America set that standard as the world standard of 440, but I haven't found absolute proof of this, but there are a lot of pages and a lot of people that I found talking about how the way that 440 hertz, I guess if you hear stuff at that frequency, you're more malleable to be controlled, and I guess 440 hertz was something the Nazis were experimenting with heavily in the 1930s. So like I just think it's crazy that like the standard of everything is tuned to 440, which was, and like all of that happened around when the Nazis were using that as like a frequency of control. And now all modern music is produced at that level. It's just crazy to me. Now, there's theory.
Well, they
I see people theorizing and talking about going back to 432, but like I guess our ears are so used to the tunings of 440 hertz that like 432 sounds wonky to us now. Which like when you listen to spa music, it's not it is it's more dissonant, right? Like 428, like even though it is a healing frequency for your nervous system, it sounds more dissonant to your ears. So it's not as pleasant for people to listen to, even though it makes you feel better.
wow,
So,
that's weird.
yeah.
The- it that timeline kind of adds up with like when the music industry became completely different. Like back then,
Yeah.
it would just be folk songs that people would cover, and then they
Yes.
became like this whole
Yeah, which
corporate.
yeah, now the corporatization of the music industry and just like there's a whole lot of documentaries and a whole lot of information out there about southern musicians and what happened to jazz culture and especially the folk culture. There's all these lawsuits around Led Zeppelin for, like publishing these old folk songs and using them as their own. Now they changed them and like their production game was insane and you probably never heard an electric guitar player, like fucking Jimmy Page at that time, but like, a lot of people are upset with Led Zeppelin for, essentially essentially profitizing off of songs that were written by southern folk artists.
Hmm. Oh yeah, that's a and the whole music industry and what they've promoted over the years. It's kind of sketchy.
It's an
Like the
ex-
first thing that comes to mind is hip hop and
it's an
the
extremely
prison.
it's an extremely predatory industry. Hip hop got hip hop's I think what happened to hip hop was just, sampling and like getting, just like kind of the backlash of sampling and what happens. Now all of that's very standard. Now there's like things in place where it's like, yeah, if we want to cover something, we get a mechanical royalty license. If we want to use a sample, we have to go talk to the artist and the record label that owns the masters. So like there's a chain of how to actually use samples nowadays, but yes, I think a lot of people got screwed over back in the day for samples, which um I know
Well,
nobody gives a fuck
well, where I
about
was
Diddy
going,
right now because he's in jail, but like Diddy, because they sampled, um, man, there's a Diddy song or something that came out from Bad Boy Entertainment that samples the Police, Every Breath You Take, and I think the Bad Boy Entertainment has to pay Sting like almost $5,000 a day because of that fucking song for the rest of its life.
damn.
Insane.
Well, where I was going with hip hop was there's this. I don't even know if it's a conspiracy theory anymore because there's apparently rappers who came out and said that this is true, but I think Ice Cube was the one that mentioned it that in the early 90s, because hip hop in the 80s was completely different. There was no gangster rap in the 80s.
Yeah.
And uh, there was a meeting between music executives, who a lot of them are tied to the prison industry, saying that they want hip hop to transform into something where they promote violence, drug use, things that would get you in trouble and glorifying it in order to fill up their prisons.
Yeah, I totally believe that, especially in fucking LA in the late 80s.
And I think there's something with rock music, especially today, where it's like all they talk about is being anxious and having some sort of like, mental problem. And I wouldn't be
Yeah.
shocked if like the pharmaceutical companies or something about that. they don't force the artists to sing about that, but they prefer getting artists signed to major labels and promoting their music big time to where there's got to be some tie-in somewhere with
Oh, I'm sure.
now all you hear on the radio now is music about feeling sad, angry, heartbroken, or fucking bitches and how much money you have through illegal means. It's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. But I do think, look, I do think that I do think certain types of music do invoke different, types of emotions. Like, I do feel like I feel like a lot of emo kind of feels anxious. Like the hi-hat pattern choices feel more anxious. Like thrice drums and like thrice guitars feel anxious versus like if I'm hearing something on like just like a chill hip hop or electronic track, like I do think different ways you use those instruments definitely invoke different things. And then lyrically, you can kind of stack onto that. Now, I don't know why some of those things have really taken hold culturally. I don't know if it was one artist starting there and then other artists kind of, like yeah, not really imitating, but like taking inspiration from that and kind of, building on it. And
Right.
ultimately that's how it's the same thing in like writing in movies. Like there's all these tropes. There are a lot of tropes you see in certain types of movies. Like they talk about horror tropes all the time. It's the same with the music industry. I feel like when I'm making certain types of music or producing, like there are certain types of tropes and things that kind of make it that genre.
Do you believe that the biggest artists today, like when they release something through Spotify, that the record companies hire all these bots to fucking stream it so they could become number one?
Um, uh, the Spotify bot thing has been proven, but it's more through third party. So what's happening is like third party, like a third party, like group that's out of India might have 300 phones in a room that's just all streaming the same song to get the numbers up. But like
And it would be the record labels paying for that, right?
yeah, and like, well,
Or the art, or the artists.
there's ways for the artist to pay for fake streams to make it look better. Because if you're, here's the thing, you can buy fakes, you can absolutely buy fake streams to make it look like you have more streams than you do. Okay, now the record label, Spotify is really trying to crack down on that. Like there are like rooms where yes, they are actually listening. There are actually like a ton of phones in them listening to the same song. But like on the other side of that, there are ways to manipulate. It's all you're looking at digital data on Spotify, so there are ways to hack that, and there are ways to manipulate that data to look like what you want it to. Now I guess there's like some AI algorithm that you can make it look like you have more streams than you actually do, but Spotify wants to break down that because I don't think Spotify's pushing big artists. I think the record labels are spending way more money on advertising for their artists than like independent artists. So like you're going to get swept out unless you have a song that exploded on TikTok, you know. But like Spotify doesn't want to pay artists for streams. Spotify wants to take as much of that money as they can. So like they are absolutely against fake streams because it's costing them more money for nothing.
Hmm.
So, I don't know if Spotify's pushing certain artists, but like I do think yes, but not from a streaming not from like a streaming numbers point of view. I think from a visibility on their platform point of view. You know,
Interesting.
and
I want to look into that.
and visibility on these platforms like ultimately comes from how many monthly listeners you have. Like the more monthly listeners you have, the higher up on the visibility you are in, like the music releases for the week.
Right. So I think there's a way to do it to where you get that initial jump to relevancy and then hoping it goes organic from there.
Yes, but I think TikTok is the most organic way to do that nowadays. But there are shady ass services that you can pay for that'll like give you fake streams and shit like that. But like Spotify's trying to crack down on that, and Spotify has talked about not even letting artists who do that now like be on their platform. I think they kicked handful of independent artists off who were like using fake numbers to like try and get because essentially like the royalty, like our distributors taking, like say, you know, there's a we use a distributor to post our music on Spotify, and I have to pay that distributor so much a year to host our music. Okay. But like, that distributor also sends us checks for, our music every quarter. Those are tiny checks and they barely cover what it costs to keep the music live online. But like, that's that's kind of like that's kind of the circle that we're in right now where like our music's just kind of making enough money to stay online forever, but not enough to actually like
But
give us anything. But
but then Spotify could turn around and tell advertisers that, hey, look how many listeners we have, and then just say that they're cracking down on it when they're really not.
and
And
that's
that way
totally
they could
possible.
assure,
That's totally possible. It could all be a lie, but
well, do you want to wrap up here?
yeah, let's wrap here. Everybody have a good week.
Later, guys.